right, good morning, and welcome to the Transportation and Planning Committee and Environment Committee meeting. I'm Larkin Eggleston, the Vice Chair. I'll be starting the meeting, and the Chair, Mayor Pro Tem Julie Eiselt, will be joining us when she's able. She had a household emergency this morning with a pipe bursting, so she is dealing with that, and best of luck to her. If we can start with introductions to my left in the room, then committee members on the call, other council members if there are any, I don't see any, and then staff and guests in that order, please.
Alicia Osborne, Charlotte Planning, Development and Design.
Larkin Eggleston, Vice Chair.
Ed Driggs, Committee Member.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Power Job, Planning Director and City Manager's Office.
Scott Curry, Charlotte Department of Transportation.
Other committee members?
Matt Newton, Committee Member.
Braxton Winston, Committee Member.
I don't see any other council members, so staff that are joining us on the call.
Liz Babson, Director for Charlotte Department of Transportation.
Grant Miachi, Planning, Design, and Development Department.
And do we have anybody else on the call who I have omitted somehow?
Jerry Rankins with MIG, consultant to the Planning Department.
All right. Thank you all for joining us today. And now I've got to switch screens real quick and pull up our agenda. Since we're the Environment Committee, I refuse to have a printed version of our agenda, so here we go. We're starting with the comprehensive plan today. And so we will throw it over to Mr. Taiwo Jaoba for us to discuss that.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Augustine. Good morning, everyone. Today, it's really more of a conversation that we want to have with you about our comprehensive plan. We've been working on this now for about 18 months or so, and we are about to wrap up the third phase and move into the final phase, and issue a public draft to the community on October 31, but also have a presentation with you all at the end of October. So today is really more like a conversation we want to have with you. So please, we will try to pause after every slide, maybe not every slide, but every few slides. But if you also want to jump in, please do that. And that's why we've allocated about 60 minutes to this session. Of course, we're mindful that there are two other items. Grant Miachi will be presenting on design considerations for public safety. It's a council referral to this committee. And then if there's time at the end, I'll just, Scott and I and Liz will brief you briefly on the strategic mobility plan as well as the Charlotte Moves efforts too. So let's start with the comprehensive plan. I will introduce our team. Alicia is the project manager. She will do some of the presentation, and then we have a consultant on board, Joe Rankins with MIG and his staff. MIG, as you know, is based out of Denver. They've done this type of work before. If you recall, almost 2 years ago when we were going through our consultant selection process, we felt that MIG was rightly positioned to do this for us because we have not done something like this in 45 years. So it's the first time, and not only that, they've done the same thing for San Antonio and also Denver, and they also are working on our Center City All-in 2040 plan. They've done the work for North Tryon, a plan in the past. They did the Center City vision plan a while back as well. So they've got a lot of experience, not only in this region, but nationally, that they could really help us as a city that's doing this for the first time in a generation. But if I hand off to Alicia, I'll just share a few things quickly. If we could go to the second slide. As you know, that our city has been growing rapidly. As a matter of fact, we have between April and today, we've had about 71 rezoning cases that have gone through our council, and we have not seen a slowdown in our development permitting process as well. And frankly speaking, the coronavirus pandemic has not stopped the pace of development for the city. Charlotte continues to be the 5th fastest growing city in the United States today. Permitting hasn't stopped. You yourself experience every third Monday night, and as you see the rezoning process, things continue to really move forward. We've seen in the last several weeks as well that as people leave all these other cities because of the pandemic or one reason or the other, Charlotte continues to be a go-to destination for people who are moving here. Third slide, or next slide. However, something that the pandemic has not really changed is our pattern of growth. We still see how we've told a story of a tale of two cities in one city. Past legacy of inequitable development, which has really resulted in what we call the arc and the wedge pattern of growth. Even with our prosperity as a city, this pattern continues even till today. We're still very much a divided city along the lines of prosperity and poverty, or those who are well connected and those who are not connected at all. And you can see that in the slide over there that concentration of poverty largely falls in the communities of color, what we call the crescent or the arc and the wedge. Next slide. The coronavirus and the recent fight for racial equity has really highlighted our inherited legacy of segregation and inequity. And we see that struggling communities of color continue to experience the pain of coronavirus and feel that their daily struggles have not been well recognized. So where do we go from here with this comprehensive plan? The next slide. When we started engaging the community, these were, things that we constantly heard from our community, that if we are actually going to create a new Charlotte, the next Charlotte, we have an opportunity with this plan, especially during such a critical and pivotal time in our history. How do we reimagine our city? How do we challenge our past way of doing business or past ways of doing business? How do we move in a more equitable and integrated direction in an effort to build an authentic and resilient city? The word authentic is very important, and so is the word resilient as well for us. What we will share with you today is a set of goals and associated bold ideas. I call them frame-breaking ideas to help reshape Charlotte's pattern of growth and explore new ideas for how we're going to fund our future development. Because if you don't have a funding strategy associated with your plan, it's just, a plan. And so we want to make sure that we share with you what we are looking at as our way of actually strategizing on how you pay for this future development. There is definitely a dire need for us as a city to not continue with business as usual, but to have a new plan that lays out a new way of doing things. But before we get to those new ideas, though, I also want Alicia to kind of walk you through the process that brought us to this point, of how we build an integrated city, how we build a city that will be equitable for all. I want us to keep a couple things in mind while she's sharing that when we set out, we knew the task ahead of us. Again, this has not been done in a generation, and we were the only city in the Southeast that had no comprehensive plan when we started this. But we also knew the challenge of when you're saying 2040 plan, a 20-year plan, most people are wondering, 20 years, I'm concerned about what's going on today. And so we want to make sure that we keep in mind that we're looking 20 years out, not 20 years prior, but also that the challenge will still be there. How can we definitely get this right? And so we'll walk you through the process, and then we'll kind of run through some of the ideas with you. So, Alicia?
Okay. Thanks, Tyrone. Next slide, please. I want to speak briefly about the planning process, because how we do this plan and the voices that are at the table is equally as important as what we put in the plan. So community engagement is paramount to this process. As you know, COVID-19 really caused us to pivot in our engagement process. So we had to be more creative and rely on our digital platforms a little more. And so we saw a slight increase in those participations. We gained 60 new members on our advisory group. We were at 320, and now we're almost at 390, which is a lot of people. But Charlotte's a big community. To me, that number speaks to the commitment that our residents have in creating a shared vision for growth and development. Since then, we've had to have virtual meeting platforms, virtual chat virtual chat sessions, and also for virtual activities. We've increased the number of engagement methods that we've had. We have 5 new methods of engagement, focus groups, using our digital platforms such as Facebook and Instagram more to improve our engagement with our residents. So all in all, we've had some pretty good response to our digital platform, but also understanding that Charlotte has a huge digital divide, so we made those activities available to those residents upon request. Next slide. And so that engagement process, next slide. So the engagement process is organized into 4 big phases. The first 2 phases, we're getting kind of the lay of the land, really understanding where we are as a community, creating that equity atlas, and creating those documents to inform us throughout the process about how we should engage and also how do we respond to the needs of our community. Some of those major themes that we heard in the first 2 phases were about developing a hybrid of connected corridors and neighborhood nodes, also increasing the way our mobility options in our community, transit and transportation corridors, being really intentional about that, and also understanding that we have a housing crisis in our community, and how do our policies start to respond to that, not just in new build, but understanding how do we do that with some of the existing landscape that we have. And also our residents talked a lot about we want to be more walkable and bikeable as a community. So some of the recommendations or policies that you hear today will respond to some of the things that we've heard. So now I turn it over. So the next phase, before I turn it over, we're in phase 3, which is the policies and strategies phase, which is really the meat of the plan. How do we start to put policies to those big ideas that our community have, and also not just what are those policies, but what are some of the transformative strategies. And then phase 4 is the review and adoption phase. As Ty mentioned, a draft document will be available to the community on October 31st. And we're envisioning providing that an online version, also a print document that we will distribute. Have to think a little bit differently about how to safely do that as well, but also thumb drive so people can just own the document if they don't want to print it. So it's an environmentally friendly way of providing access to that document. And once that document is released in October, we will have a 6-month review and adoption period, which is the longest we've had for any planning document. We really want the community to read the document, understand it, challenge us if there's some information in it that we're not pushing ourselves on, but we want to make sure that it's in the community's hands for a good period of time. And then once it's adopted in April of 2021, this is a living document. It will be implemented, monitored, and updated continuously. So this is something different as well with our planning documents. So before, I want to turn it over to Jay Rankins with MIG and also Matt Prosper with EPS Systems, including our economic analysis component to the document. Jay?
Great. Thank you, Alicia. Next slide. So I think it's important to point out that there's a lot of things that we've been doing over the last year and a half that were really driven by the community's desire to create a more equitable community. When Ty talked about some of those guiding principles about being authentic, about being integrated, resilient, and equitable, it was the community's desire to say, yeah, we have some really great things going, but we want to take a step back and think about how is the way that we're doing business as a community, as a city, with all of our partners, how is that influencing all of our residents, all the different neighborhoods, old and new, longtime residents, new residents, and all different walks of life, ages and whatnot. So the equitable growth framework really became our approach to the overall plan, not just one little component. We started with an equity atlas. We proceeded to develop equity metrics and define what success would look like as far as creating a more equitable community across employment, housing, access to goods and services, recreation, and then also thinking about environmental justice components. And so now that has informed a larger set of goals and policies And we're going to give you a little taste today of some of the bigger ideas within that policy framework, but in the plan that is being drafted, and the next time we speak with you all, we can take a deep dive into many of those aspects. Next slide. So the structure for the plan, we've already, in previous presentations, Taiwo and Alicia have gone over the vision, some of the guiding principles we talked about, and even giving you sort of a glimpse at some of the plan goals. In a previous iteration, we were calling those framework policies. So if that was something that you heard about and now you're wondering where those went, we've combined some earlier goals that were established with framework policies to create a simpler kind of arrangement or organization. In future presentations and in the draft plan, you'll see really detailed policies, projects, and programs to support a set of 10 goals. And then there is this important component of complete communities and places, the place types that you may have heard about. But I think where the rubber really meets the road is in the implementation. And we're looking at that through a lens of inclusive change management. So it's not that every place has to grow, it's not that every place has to redevelop necessarily, but we want to make sure that all areas of the community, all parts of Charlotte, all residents are benefiting from the investments that will be made both on the public and private sides moving forward. Next slide. So our 10 plan goals, you can see here, we'll step through these, and what we'd like to do is highlight the goal itself. These are just shorthand, quick kind of titles here. So we'll go through each of these goals, and then we'll pause after every 3 or 4 and allow for some discussion. So next slide. The first is this concept of 10-minute neighborhoods, and this actually emerged really quickly when we're looking at our equity atlas and some of those analytics around where folks had access to jobs and housing and healthy food and recreation. We were realizing that there were big portions of the community. The arc and wedge, is a macro sort of pattern, but even within some of those places, there's more nuanced patterns of growth and development and lack of equity in certain respects. So the idea is that all Charlotte households will have access to essential amenities, goods, and services within a 10-minute walk, bike, or transit trip by 2040. And those different modes provide some choice, the modes of travel, walk, bike, and transit, but also sort of respect and acknowledge that different parts of Charlotte develop differently. So in some places it may be very feasible to walk 10 minutes, and in other places transit might be necessary. So then calling out a couple of the big ideas that have emerged, and we worked with our ambassadors and strategic advisors to help identify these. One is to develop a robust network of food co-ops, community gardens, and neighborhood-based food sharing. Full-service grocery stores are probably the ultimate goal in making sure everyone has access to full-service grocery stores. But as you all probably know, the city of Charlotte does not build grocery stores. And even with incentives, it can be difficult to get a grocery store to locate in a place where maybe there's a strong competitor nearby. Their equations that they use to kind of figure that out might not necessitate a grocery store in the short term. So we want to figure out what are some options that the community can actually do and act on to fill that need for healthy food. Another is to create a culture of developer community collaboration through community benefit agreements. So the idea is that we would actually help facilitate conversations between developers and the neighborhoods to figure out how can those neighborhoods benefit from the development that is going in. In some cases, that could be a use that is actually, a tenant within the space. It may be contributing to a trail connection, maybe a mobility hub. There's all sorts of things that could be a part of that. Affordable housing would be a great goal there as well. So we can, as I said, after I think goal 3, we'll pause and take some comment. The next one, next slide. I tried to advance on my own keyboard, sorry, is neighborhood diversity and inclusion. So we have goals 2 and 3 are both related to housing. Goal 2 is really focused on the types of housing products that are available and where. Goal 3 you'll see is more focused on affordability and attainability of the housing. So they're very much related, of course, but we felt like they were distinct enough concepts to have two separate goals. So neighborhood diversity and inclusion is that Charlotte will strive for all neighborhoods to have a diversity of housing options by increasing the presence of middle density housing. That would include things like duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes, accessory dwelling units, or granny flats, sometimes they're called, and other small footprint housing types, and ensuring land use regulations allow for flexibility and creation of housing within existing neighborhoods. That's a delicate balance, of course, right? So if you're relaxing or allowing more things to be built in certain areas, there can be development pressures, so we need to be cognizant of that. And there are policies that we're calling out in the more detailed document to help mitigate some of those pressures. But we also realize that we want to have options for people to live in all different areas. So a single family home area should have at least a handful of other options within that area. And likewise, an area that may cater very well to millennials or Gen Y folks who have, it's just themselves or them and a roommate. And so a 1-bedroom apartment and, studios could be great. But what about a family with 3 or 4 children? So where are they going to rent? So the big idea there is to eliminate exclusionary single-family zoning and exclusionary provisions in homeowners association covenants, codes, and restrictions to allow housing diversity everywhere. Obviously, there would still be design restrictions or regulations. There'd be size requirements and things like that. So to say everywhere is a little bit of a misnomer, but because you'd have to meet certain requirements still. But the city can, in fact, do away with a sort of monolithic single-family zoning designation even today. But it would take some work at the state level to alter HOA's codes, covenants, and restrictions. Next slide, and we'll pause after this one. Housing access for all. So this is about affordability and attainability. So Charlotte will ensure opportunities for residents of all incomes to access affordable housing through the preservation of naturally occurring affordable and workforce housing. So those tend to be older product. They can still be very sound housing options, but they tend to be a little more affordable. It can also be based on location. So trying to retain as much of that naturally occurring affordable and workforce housing, then increasing the number of affordable workforce housing units in new construction as well. Those tend to have to be subsidized in some way, but not always. Workforce housing tends to be maybe size of unit or amenitization that keeps that cost down. But new construction is more expensive, of course. So big ideas: lead the charge to pass enabling legislation for inclusionary zoning and implement throughout the community. Again, that would be a state level initiative. But then also create a robust program for restorative justice, targeting home ownership, creation, and growth of small businesses, and equity building for the Black community, including strategic application of some of our existing tools, as well as development of new tools. So I think if Ty and Alicia, you agree, maybe we can pause there for some questions and comments.
Yes.
Yeah.
Before we move on.
And if anybody has a question, if they can use the hand raise feature in the WebEx. But I've got one, Ty. On the 10-minute walkable communities, there was some discussion around access to fresh and healthy food. And I'm wondering if we have the legal authority as a city or as a council to, for instance, identify priority needs in targeted areas, in this case, corridors that are food deserts, and the need for full-service grocery stores. I know Tom Warschauer and folks and other folks on that team have spent a lot of time looking at food deserts and doing a study of our markets and things in the community. As far as rezonings or permitting or things like that, could we identify here are corridors that are food deserts, and if we have folks who are coming in and willing to fill that need, we can either expedite or bypass some of the rezoning process or whatever administrative hurdles are in the way for someone who might be willing to open a full-service food or grocery store or something of that nature in a place that's a food desert. do we locally have the ability to remove some of the obstacles in their way or reduce some of the controllable costs to incentivize them to do that?
I said that you can approach it the same way we can approach affordable housing issue, where we do not have inclusionary zoning today, but you as council has authority to incentivize developers who are providing affordable housing units, either by saying staff reimburse their permit fees and things like that, expedite the process. We can approach it the same way. So where we say we cannot force you to go there, but if your market indicators are telling you that it's the right place to be, we can work with you by expediting the process for getting permits to be there. Yes, we can do that. Council can do that.
I hope that's something we'll explore, because I know, I'm sure many of my colleagues do as well. I hear from folks in certain parts of my district that are largely food deserts, and I think that if we can figure out a way, like we've tried to do with affordable housing, to make it easier for folks or make it more enticing for folks to not only create those, but create them where they're needed, because we know in certain parts of town there will be 8 high-end grocery stores, full-service grocery stores, and then you'll have, a whole swath of town that has nothing but convenience stores for people to get food. So I'll leave it there for now. I know Mr. Winston has a question, and then welcome to the chair who can take over from there.
I think the grocery store conversation is,
Can you speak up, Braxton?
I think the whole grocery store conversation, we'll need to have a whole strategy there, because I don't know, I feel like we're going to have to put skin in the game. But the comment that I had was, I like the big idea around the elimination of single-family zoning, but I would caution that we need, as council members, are going to really need guidance on how to do that correctly, and how to do that strategically in different locations. One of the things that we don't want to get to is a situation where, that's kind of like a false pretense for making a good land use decision. For instance, this past Monday night, we have
Ashton, we can't hear you.
during the last rezoning meeting, we had a wide. I think somebody might need Mr. Rankin. I think if you mute, that might help as well.
Is it possible to get Braxton's audio turned up? Or can you speak closer to the microphone, Braxton?
Can you hear me now?
Not really.
Not
You're
really.
usually very loud. What's different?
There's nothing different. There's nothing different on this end. Basically, we need a strategy to understand when land use changes actually do make sense from moving from single family to a different zone. We just don't want to just get awash in people changing single family just for the heck of it, and it not being a better land use decision, if that makes sense.
So for those, if you couldn't hear, maybe online you can hear Braxton a little bit better, but the comment was that we need more of a strategy to transition if we are going to go and change single-family rezonings, that we need a strategy to be able to do that. Is that a good summary, Braxton?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
We need some guidance on how to do it in a strategic manner. Yes. And so these are really more of, this is really where this policy, this vision is supposed to reside. The beauty of this is that we're also working on our place types and the Unified Development Ordinance at the same time. So that's the strategy that will help us get to that point. And you're very right. If the difference between what we're doing here and what Minneapolis did was that they first had their comprehensive plan, and of course they started on their Unified Development Ordinance after that, or revising their zoning ordinance. We already started our Unified Development Ordinance prior to putting it on hold and then getting to this point. So we have a little bit of a uniqueness in how we see this happening. But when we get to that point where we're now bringing place types to you and what the UDO will look like, you're going to begin to see what that strategy looks like for how to bring this to the ground.
Thank you. Mr. Driggs?
Is there somebody else? Okay. So I just wanted to make the general comment. this city and the country got where we are in terms of the many successes we've had based on the operation of a free enterprise economy. So if we make plans that overrule the choices that people make, businesses and individuals, we have to recognize that that could have consequences. And to your point, Mr. Eggleston, we can probably help to induce people to locate in places where we want them to, but it'll probably take a subsidy to really make it economically viable for them, because private companies are not going to go to places where we want them to go if it's not profitable unless we make it worth their while. So that in turn means that we have to look at the cost side of many of these measures we're contemplating, and the costs can manifest themselves in different ways. They could either be subsidies that we need to provide, as in housing, or they could be inferior resource utilization because we're imposing requirements that are not in fact economic in pursuit of our social priorities. So all of this has got to be done thoughtfully with an awareness of the moving parts. And given that our mobility plan alone looks to people in the mobility task force like it could be a $20 billion undertaking, I just hope that we won't make plans and establish a vision that really just can't be realized. We have got to operate within an environment where we recognize the importance of incentives, the importance of freedom of choice, and that we kind of operate really around the edges to try and induce people to make choices that align with our goals for the city. But if we try to rewrite the entire script, we're going to end up in a socialist environment, and we know what happened in socialist environments in other places. It really undermines the vitality of the economy, your ability to create jobs, and other things that are also important to us. So I just hope we're making these choices. And Ty, I won't go on about this, but I've said before, the fact that we're starting to hear about these policies a month before they're meant to be shared with the public, I can't breathe in this mask, a month before they're meant to be shared with the public after they've been worked on for 18 months, I don't know about you guys, but I don't know what's in there. I'm very curious to see what these policies are. And we're going to be given 4 weeks before they are shared with the public for comment to decide whether or not this is something that we feel as a group on council that we really ought to be sharing with the public. So the timeline bothers me a bit. I'm prepared to look at what comes forward, and then if I think it's okay, I'll go along with it. That's great. But I just have to kind of serve notice that I think there's a chance that we're going to see this and that we're going to have some ideas that we haven't had an opportunity to express yet that may make that timeline very optimistic. Because frankly, my impression is that what you've heard so far are a whole lot of principles and kind of broader framework things, none of which are objectionable. Yes, we want to eliminate food deserts. We want connectivity. We want all of this stuff. But now that we get down to the nitty-gritty, how do we pay for it? What sacrifices are people going to have to make in order to achieve what we want to do? I can tell you, for example, that getting rid of single-family zoning is going to cause riots in my part of town. Every time you try to change an R3 in District 7 to something else, like a UR2, I've got a mutiny on my hands. So this is not going to happen without some resistance. And that is the art of making a plan like this work. So I like the fact that we have a vision, that we've established where we want to go, but I don't think we can minimize the choices that we're going to have to make and the people that we're going to have to win over who are going to bear some of the costs of this in order to achieve this. There's no point in putting in place a plan that really cannot be implemented in the end. So I'll just say that. I look forward to hearing more about the policies, but as an economist, I'm very sensitive to the kind of consequences, the unintended consequences, the dislocations, the loss of efficiency, and things like that can occur when you start letting government dictate the choices that people otherwise have been making for themselves. I'll just say
so I want to comment on that because I agree with you that we have to have time to digest this information, and the public has got to be able to be educated to the point where they can weigh in as well. So it's important to do that. But I have to push back on the idea of unintended consequences in economics, because that's what got us to where we are today. When we redlined Myers Park, it kept people out of Myers Park, and the people that got to move there created wealth for themselves. And there are neighborhoods in this city where they were told to live that are still in the same condition today, and that was, I think it probably was it was absolutely an intended consequence to redline people out of certain neighborhoods. So yes, there is going to be a cost. We can call it a subsidy, we can call it restorative justice, we can call it acknowledging our history, but that's part of the conversation too. And it isn't, from an economic standpoint, you can't just have the conversation about finances and economics without the conversation on what our history is and what it's done to people. But people have to have access to transportation. They have to have access to schools. We build transportation from point A to point B and forget everybody in between. And that's been the history of our community. And yes, it's going to cost us something to go back and to correct what was done in the past and give people opportunities to attend good schools, to be close to where they work, to be close to a good bus line that might even have a seat to sit down and a light overhead that keeps them safe when they're out there at night. And if we're not willing to pay for that, then that's a whole different conversation that we have to start having.
I think we should pay for it. I'm just saying that we haven't really confronted what that might mean.
Or we haven't
also,
confronted what caused it.
I just don't want us, with the best of intentions, to actually repeat some of those mistakes of the past, where we do a thing because we want to achieve something good, and then we realize that that's actually causing a problem over here. Most of these major overhauls are going to involve winners and losers. And you're going to start to hear from the losers as soon as they understand who they are. So I'm not objecting to any of the things that we're trying to do. It's a procedural comment, but I'm saying, for one, giving us a 1-month window in which we can look at what somebody else has drafted before the public starts to get involved strikes me as being a tight timeline. And I just have a concern that when we look at what the public sector has got to do, I mean, look at the last few years. We've had an increasing engagement by members of minority communities, and we've had, in response to criticism of government, we can point to all kinds of people in positions of authority who come from minorities. What have we accomplished? At some point, the ability of local government to cure all of these problems is finite. And so we need to do the best we can and not cripple ourselves in the process. And I'm just saying we need to find that right balance. So I've been on board with the housing. I get that. We've made those investments, and that was good. I see the problem related to food deserts. But I'm just sort of sounding a note of caution here that we also have a business community, and we have people who have personal preferences about where they live and the environment in which they want to live. And if we run roughshod over all of that with our utopian vision for 2040, we're going to discover that it's very hard to get it all done.
No, I agree with that. And collaboration matters and education matters. I don't think most people understand why we're in the position we're in. So we need to take that opportunity and make sure that we're putting education in there as part of our narrative and as part of our initiative to try to accomplish these things. So
I know that there is a widespread will, just quickly, there is a widespread will in the community, including the business community and so on, to participate in an undertaking like this. We've seen the investments in affordable housing, so we can tap into that. But I just know, again, from some of my experience in my district with these rezonings, that if we come in and say, that's it, no more single family, there's going to be a lot of unhappiness about that. That's not something we can just kind of do with a stroke of the pen and not think about.
I know you probably have comments, Councilmember, but let me quickly correct some assumptions with regards to the process. I think I can speak to the process. This process has been as transparent and open as much as possible. I think Alicia went through that, how we've had, if we were to document everyone we've interacted with in this city, or at least all the interactions we've had is over 500,000 interactions and about 6,000 different voices. We've gone to different communities over the last 18 months. We deliberately built a 4 to 6 month process into this process because when we release it, everything that has got us to this point has been influenced by public conversations, either through stakeholders or what we've sent out. And they've been really robust and intense, actually, conversations where they're not just theoretical. Nothing in this document were a result of staff telling people what to do, but rather hearing from folks who have participated. But understanding that that could also be limited, we build that 4 to 5 month to before you adopt or consider to adopt in April. What goes out end of October is a draft document. It allows people to still weigh in and allows us to go back and forth between you, the constituents, and ourselves. So this is not set in stone at all. If we don't do that, then we don't, we miss the opportunity to engage before you even get anything in March or April to adopt, it will have gone through public process. But here's something that I'd like to say, though, is that whoever is out there from the private sector, the business sector that's waiting for us to have a document before they jump on it to critique it, I think it's unfair to the process. I think this is the time for them to let their voices be heard. We've been out in the public for the last 15 to 18 months. I think it's important for people to know that this is about our future. Let's not wait until after council is about to adopt before people now come out and say, I don't agree to that. I think today is that time. And the way we've structured the stakeholders is not just made up of residents, but also business leaders and people who develop as well. So I just want us to be mindful of that. So you're not seeing something, in essence, you're not seeing something that will eventually not go back to the public. We will make sure that it does. And come back to you as well in the process.
Thank you. I'm trying to see if there's hands up virtually. Mr. Newton?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Thank you for the presentation so far, Jeff, and I appreciate everyone's hard work on this. I would agree with the chair with her previous comments. I don't personally believe that us incentivizing the private sector undermines a free market economy, particularly if the private sector are willing partners with us in that endeavor. I wanted to make the point, too, that as we talk about affordability, particularly affordable housing and workforce housing, let's not overlook affordability, and this gets to the Mayor Pro Tem's point as well, affordability in more affluent areas. I think it's really, I think to illustrate the point here, I think it's really opportune that we have this conversation about food deserts, because I can tell you in areas of my district, food deserts do exist, and oftentimes when I have discussed the possibility of a grocer, I am told, and this has happened with grocers themselves, I am told it's not the number of rooftops, right? It's the AMIs. And so I think it is important that we have this conversation about affordability and about incentivizing development in areas where we know it's needed. It's very stark to see the crescent and the wedge map again and again and again, and it hasn't changed, and I don't know how long. But for our involvement in ensuring that we create equity and equality and upward mobility in our community, I'm not so sure it's going to just happen on its own. And so anyhow, just wanted to make those points. And at the same time, too, I wanted to weigh in on home ownership, because I think oftentimes we look at affordable housing and workforce housing in this prism.
Mr. Newton?
Yes,
can I interrupt you just for a sec? I'm sorry. Sure. Can I ask if we can hold the rest of those questions? We've got 7 other bullets, and homeownership might come up in one of the other 7 goals, and we have 15 minutes to get through the other 7 goals. Would that be okay?
Sure. I can button this up just by saying I don't want us to overlook that. And if we're going to be speaking about that later, fantastic. But preliminarily speaking, I think in that context of affordable housing and workforce housing, home ownership is something that I think we also need to be having the conversation about.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Jalil.
Okay, so we have 7 more goals, but after that, we still have some implementation steps to walk you through. So Jay, I'll ask you to just walk through. Maybe we wait until after those goals before you, before we
Pause.
open it up. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we'll go through the remaining 7 goals, then we'll pause, and then we'll hit the very last portion, which is the implementation approach. So next slide. So Charlotte's actually looked to, in our work around the country, looked to as an example of really great transit-oriented development, particularly along the Blue Line investment. What we're seeing across communities is a desire to have TOD, transit-oriented development, that is more equitable, so ensuring that the folks who actually need the transit in the first place have access to housing, jobs, goods and services in those transit-oriented development areas. We're also seeing that bus rapid transit and other forms of high-performance transit are, in fact, changing the game board a bit, kind of tilting things and, contributing to transit-oriented development. And then something that we heard from the community members was actually around trails. And really think that that's a very unique aspect of Charlotte, is the great trail network, the greenways, the overall tree, canopy and cover. And so could there be another type of TOD, trail-oriented development, that contributes to the pattern of growth across the community? So we have Charlotte will promote moderate to high intensity, compact, mixed-use urban development along high-performance transit lines and near separated multi-use pathways or trails. In the more detailed policies, it's spelled out very clearly. We're not talking about putting development right on top of greenways. We would respect those buffers. We would do something that is environmentally sensitive, of course. But putting more people in proximity to such a great asset is really the intent there, both with transit and with trails. So the big idea is to prioritize equitable TOD, ETOD, just to throw in another acronym for you, along high-performance transit and trail corridors. So a lot of those tools, and Matt's going to give you a little glimpse at a few of those when we get to the implementation section, exist today, and it's really about how do we apply them in the TOD environment. Next slide. Goal 5 is safe and equitable mobility. We've been working really closely with the Charlotte Moves team throughout this entire process. Before it was even articulated that there was going to be a strategic mobility plan, before it was called Charlotte Moves, we've been working hand in hand with CDOT and with CATS. And so this is a pretty robust goal, but as you know, transportation is a very complex thing. You could quite easily, and I think we had an earlier iteration, where there was a goal for walking, a goal for biking, a goal for transit, a goal for freight, a goal for cars. And so we've tried to package that relatively succinctly here. So it's about safe and equitable mobility options for all travelers, regardless of where they live, their demographics, their household demographics, and an integrated system of transit, bikeways, sidewalks, shared use paths, and streets that support a sustainable, connected, and prosperous and innovative network that connects all Charlotteans to jobs, housing, each other, amenities, goods, services in the region. So really connecting people to goods and services. So it's very much related in some ways to the 10-minute neighborhoods. Some of those, divides or lack of equitable access can be tackled through transportation improvements. In other cases, it'll probably require actually adding a land use or an amenity closer to where someone lives. But the big idea is to set an aggressive mode shift goal. So that's in the works. Some other communities like Austin, Seattle, Denver have set a very aggressive goal for non-single occupancy vehicle auto trips. And that has actually then had this trickle-down effect of driving a lot of policy decision-making where the dollars are spent. So that, in essence, is the big idea there. Next slide. Goal 6, healthy, safe, and active communities. Again, we intentionally have some overlap between our goals. We feel as though that's actually making a stronger document versus a siloed approach. And so there are some aspects of this around healthy food, around walking, cycling, that show up in some of our other goals. But all Charlotteans will live and work in safe and resilient neighborhoods that enable healthy and active lifestyles by reducing exposure to harmful environmental contaminants. So that's some of our environmental justice elements that we're looking at. Encouraging neighborhood investments in walking, cycling, and recreation facilities, and providing access to healthy food options and healthcare services. Big idea is to institute a program for local grassroots shared management or adoption of and programming of public open space, and encourage development of organizations throughout the city to create additional opportunities to engage in active living and help develop healthy neighborhoods. Those could be neighborhood driven, they could be business driven, and some of the best examples that are aware of are actually a combination of the two. But the idea that we have leftover space, we have sometimes through development requirements, open space, plazas, even park-like space that may be publicly accessible, but folks don't know it. There's not a clear way to access that or even an invitation to do so. So that's the big idea there. Next slide. Goal 7, integrated natural and built environments. Charlotte will protect and enhance its water quality, tree canopy, and natural areas with a variety of trees, plantings, green infrastructure, green building practices, and open space at different scales throughout the entire community. We've been looking at CAP, we've been looking at the RID work, the Resilient Innovation Districts, the Tree Canopy Action Plan, a lot of coordination, as well as with the MEC Playbook work that's been going on to establish a set of policies, programs, and projects related to this big goal, which is a really important one to Charlotteans. The big idea, implement the Strategic Energy Action Plan by implementing Resilient Innovation District programs or something, maybe it gets named differently, but that's really focusing on net zero development and carbon neutrality. And that's going to take a lot of different forms, depending on whether we're talking about residential neighborhoods, whether we're talking about light industrial or sort of this innovation mixed use type of area, an office area, or a mixed use center. Next slide, Matt.
Yes, hi, thank you. This is Matt Prosser with Economic and Planning Systems. We're a land use economics firm that's supporting MIG on the plan. And we're focused on economic development, but also fiscal impact elements. So I'll be touching on those two related goals. So the first one is goal 8, diverse and resilient economic opportunity. And the goal being that we'll have an opportunity for upward economic mobility through access to a diverse mix of jobs, careers that align with education and skill levels of residents and economic strengths of the region. So really the idea here that we need to increase opportunities for all residents, but doing so in a way that's strategic and aligns with both the skills and the abilities that we have in the community, but also the economic opportunities that present itself. And so there's a lot of policies that we're working on that talk about ways to provide education opportunities and upskilling opportunities to citizens, as well as how do we align our investments in places and businesses that will support the growth of jobs for all. So really the big idea that came out of this policy is develop a regional activity center. So that being our major mixed use places, our major employment places, to develop regional activity centers in the east, west, middle, and outer areas with jobs, housing, schools, and daycare services. Now, those geographies might sound a little bit weird. You'll understand them a little bit more as we get into talking about the implementation of the plan. As we move forward into developing a future place type map after the adoption of the plan, specific geographies within the community have been defined to help us do that place type mapping. And these references relate to the areas that we've identified. But really the goal is or the big idea, I should say, is to create economic opportunities, places where jobs, high quality jobs will exist in places they haven't currently in the community. And so targeting those areas to try to identify places we can create employment. And not just doing that in a vacuum. And, we've done a fair amount of market analysis as well as economic analysis to help inform the identification of places that can attract jobs. And we know things like transportation and transit are a big driver for the ability to have employment. And so making sure we're aligning those asset investments in our current infrastructure with where we want to create jobs, so that we're doing them in places that it's realistic to achieve those goals. Jay, I'll switch back to you for number 9.
Yeah, next slide. So one of the things that's going to be really challenging through this that we've heard about from the community is retaining our identity and charm. So this has to do with neighborhood character, has to do with culture and history, and some of that's tangible, some of that's intangible. As we are successful in creating new amenities, new access, maybe new housing and employment areas like Matt was just talking about, what does that mean for the existing development, the existing community, the existing culture of that place? So Charlotte will cultivate community-driven placemaking identity while limiting displacement and retaining the essence of existing neighborhoods by intentionally directing redevelopment. So part of this is being strategic about where we are, focusing some of those incentives perhaps, or it simply could be zoning district mapping and that sort of thing. But there's still going to have to be other steps to help to mitigate some of these, the potential loss or displacement of culture throughout the community. So a couple of big ideas here. One is protect what another community that we're looking at as a case study has called naturally occurring cultural districts. So those tend to be sort of more organic, kind of grown up, tends to be some sort of a smaller commercial area surrounded by a tight-knit neighborhood. And they're very, kind of symbiotic, working together. But without organization, without the right tools, without a voice at the table, they could easily be displaced, or that area could be broken up. So really giving them some tools through some sort of a district program. And then become a leader in neighborhood influence public art installations. It's not to say that we could only use local artists. We still want to pull national and international artists. That's, I think, part of the identity of Charlotte, in fact. But making sure that some of the pieces are in neighborhoods, that the neighborhood members have a chance to inform the story that's being told by that art, and that it's really intended for that neighborhood audience in a lot of cases. Next slide, Matt.
Yes, and the last of the goals is fiscally responsible. And so the goal being Charlotte.
We maybe should have led this with this one, Matt, but keep going.
Last but not least, Charlotte will align capital investments with the adopted growth strategy, ensure the benefit of public and private sector investments benefit all residents, and limit the public costs of accommodating growth. And so we've done a lot of work related to fiscal impact of different growth patterns to help inform this plan. And a lot of those discussions we've had with both city and county service providers, and have, I highlighted some findings that we've made sure to implement integrate into the policies that we have. And so making sure we're not planning for a large amount of growth where we don't have the capacity to build it, to serve it. And things like that. And so one thing we do know is that the places that are growing the most in the community are the places where a ton of value is generated. A lot of the revenue that goes to our community to help fund all these services is generated in those new growth areas. And so what we need to do is recognize that that's an asset we can leverage to both make sure that those new places are growing correctly in the way that we want them to, but also use that value to help address issues throughout the community. And so that big idea comes out of that idea of how do we direct at least half of our public infrastructure spending over the next 20 years to the most vulnerable communities. And so that we are making sure that all residents are benefiting from this growth, because all the growth has impacts throughout the community. And we need to make sure that both the negative and positive benefits of growth of the community are borne throughout. And so we'll touch on some more elements of the fiscal impact analysis and also funding and financing coming up in the implementation strategy, but making sure that you all are cognizant that this is a major goal of the plan, to make sure that we're growing in a fiscally responsible manner and doing so that in a way that can benefit all and not just the areas that are growing or that already have a nice community. All right, Jay,
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Taiwo, you can go to the next slide. Taiwo, would you like to pause here?
Yes.
Or would you like, okay.
So I know we've got a few more slides and we still have 2 items, Mayor Pro Tem, but I also know that Councilmember Driggs has indicated a few times in the past about the need for community to understand how a 20-year plan becomes implemented at the granular level. So the next slides actually address those as well as the fiscal impact analysis. But we could stop here for a minute or so if there's any comments that Jay and Alicia and I could address before we move into that last segment.
So I see 2 questions by Mr. Newton and Mr. Winston. And if you could just be really mindful of our time, because we've got a lot of other information to get to. So I saw Mr. Newton first.
Madam Chair, thank you for that information. I just wanted to make the quick comment. I think transportation is so very, very important. At the same time, I don't believe it's a substitute for jobs in local communities and neighborhoods that don't have those jobs. Time is such a very important commodity, and seeing to it, I love the concept of, kind of the 10-minute commute wherever, but at the same time, to the extent that we can create jobs in local neighborhoods where they don't currently exist, I think we do our part in further cutting down on that time, if not more effectively. So just wanted to make those comments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Winston?
Number 10, strategy number 10 about half investment in the place in underserved areas or area. I forgot exactly the verbiage, but we need to make sure that there are anti-displacement, anti-gentrification measures put in here. It's that double side of the sword, right? If you look over time, for instance, you can put a lot of investment into neighborhoods that really need it, but then it drives the prices up and drives people out. We know we're dealing with this on the west side, and we're trying to implement strategies where folks are getting help on their property taxes, for instance, but we have limited tools to deal with that. So number 10 is good, but we need a strategy to combat the unwanted.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. Okay, Ty? Go ahead.
All right, Jay, keep moving.
All right, we'll take it home here. So thinking about implementation, there are real market dynamics at play here. As Councilman Driggs said earlier, there can be pie in the sky vision, but we've been really trying to approach this through a lens of realism. A piece of that is what can the market do? What will it do with some maybe guidance? And then also, where will it go? Sort of in the types of development if left without guidance. So understanding all those different implications, how those play out with adjacencies and access, inclusion and diversity, as well as this is a 20-year vision, and likely some of the goals may take longer than 20 years to accomplish. I hope not, in my heart of hearts, but in some cases, we're really talking about a long time period. So how do you facilitate that transition over time in a way that doesn't lose the integrity of the place, doesn't lose the culture, the charm, that sort of thing? And so the top bubble here is the comprehensive plan. And we just wanted to put together a simple diagram that explains how the comprehensive plan isn't a standalone document. It does establish the overall vision and these big ideas and several high-level policies, but it's going to require development ordinances in the UDO. And as Ty pointed out, we're actually in a unique situation where we're not going to have to wait another 3-4 years for the UDO to catch up the comprehensive plan. A lot of communities take that route. So we're going to have something that may not be synced up exactly, but would be right on the heels, most likely, of the comprehensive plan. Strategic action plans, those would be things like the CAP, the Tree Canopy Action Plan, the Mobility Action Plan, where you can do a deeper dive into a particular topic. And again, under that larger umbrella, but really thinking about the nuts and bolts of a particular issue, topic, or potentially even geography. County-wide plans, that would include things like MEC Playbook, Livable MEC, some of those things that we're thinking about the county-wide and even regional scale, and how are those linking to and syncing with the comprehensive plan. The zoning map will be the application of the development ordinances, and all that will be guided by community area plans, which I'll talk to in just a moment. So next slide. Next slide again. And next slide again. So community area planning is, as Matt pointed out, we do have some kind of working geographies. They are far from set, these different boundaries. But what you're seeing on the screen right now is actually where existing area plans and district plans lie. So they have all different approaches. They touch on different topics. You can see that not all of the community even has a plan guiding it at that more localized scale. And so what we want to do in the comprehensive plan is actually establish a program by which smaller geographies, communities work together, neighborhoods with perhaps some affinity to each other and kind of understanding of those smaller areas, that they can actually kind of put more meat on the bone when it comes to mapping of places, informing the zoning districts, and thinking about particularly investments in the community. So next slide. So what we did was use this working map, again, a very draft set of geographies, but we wanted to talk about smaller geographies with the strategic advisors and ambassadors about what some of the priorities are within these different areas. So some people pointed out issues with access to recreation or healthy food, others was access to jobs. Some said we don't have a mixed use kind of place to go to. There are no destinations in certain sets of these geographies. So the overall plan then would be to take those high-level priorities that have been set throughout this process and roll out a future place type mapping exercise in these smaller geographies. And ultimately, next slide, the development of community area plans using the 10 place types that have been talked about for quite a while now and was presented in previous meetings, but includes different flavors of neighborhoods, parks and preserves, activity centers, and employment uses. And each of those would have multiple zoning districts associated with them. So that will be coming, next slide, in our coordination with the UDO as well as in the other plans. But that's an important note. It isn't, the palette, we want it to be simple and accessible in terms of the types of places we want to create, but the zoning districts will in fact have to be much more nuanced. And just for instance, 2 neighborhood types could mean 8, 10, 12 residential zoning districts. So there's a lot of different nuance that can play out within that, but we are coordinating all these different efforts and ensuring that the community isn't overwhelmed by all these different conversations, that they are in fact coordinated. Next slide. So the last piece here, before we just hit on a couple of next steps in terms of process, we really want to talk about implementation. So that's the green circles and boxes at the bottom there. So if you can advance to the next slide, I'll let Matt talk about these next 2.
And I just have to ask if we can truncate a little bit of it, or else we're going to have to talk about one of our other items if we want to move that. So thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, I'll be brief. So as you know, we have completed a fiscal impact analysis of the desired growth pattern of the comprehensive plan. And the goal of the fiscal impact analysis was to help understand how different land use patterns and policies and decisions that we're making will impact the fiscal health of the community. What we found is, at least in our desired growth pattern that we have, is that we will grow in a more efficient way that'll create a greater benefit. So we're going to reduce the impact that we have on the community from our growth. But even with that occurring, we do know that certain elements lack funds and investments. Specifically, we've highlighted the need for investment in mobility, in schools, and community amenities. And these are items that don't necessarily have the necessary dedicated funding sources or access to funding sources to help address the impacts of new growth. And we also know, as I mentioned earlier, is that growth areas create a ton of value, and we need to do a better job as a community to leverage and capture that value, invest it throughout the community. So next slide. So within the implementation plan, we're really trying to orient our investment strategy, our funding and financing strategy around the idea of partnerships. The graphic on the right is what one of my cynical colleagues calls the share the pain model, where each element of the community, whether it's the city, residents, businesses, and developers, are sharing in the investment in the community. I more optimistically call it the share the gain model. I think that there's a lot that can be created through these partnerships that is beyond what you can create from just the city or just from a private development or just from a private business. And so how do we make sure we are using these partnerships in ways to help be more efficient and address these major investments that we have? I think you all are already cognizant there's a lot of cost that goes into creating this vision, and we're going to need to make sure all partners are invested and working on that. And to do that, we're going to need new funding tools. So looking at ways that we can address cost recovery of certain infrastructure that's needed, whether that might be impact fees. I know there's challenges at the state level to address that, but something we need to explore to address some of those areas that I mentioned lack funding. But also the idea of value capture. How do we make sure that we're leveraging the value that's generated in our high growth areas, in our high value areas, and making sure that the whole community benefits from it? And then lastly, the idea of shared prosperity through partnerships. So we're seeing a lot of things nationally where incentives and efforts within the city are done in a partnership with not only the private sector, but also the community. And so are there ways that we can create improvement districts to address a shared approach to investing in these areas, or the use of what we've already mentioned, community benefit agreements? How can we involve the community in identifying and helping to fund the amenities that they want to impact to address the impact from new developments that are occurring on their community? So with that, I'll turn it back to Jay.
Great. I think there's 2 more slides that Alicia was going to cover, and I bet she can do it really, really quickly. So
Really fast. So the next steps in the process, next slide, please. We're hosting a community event on October 31st, which is a drive-in event to safely gather community residents to share this plan document, to begin the conversation around some of the ideas that they have expressed so far in these plan goals. So that's the hope of that project. Next slide. And then there are other, we'll continue to come before this body to continue our discussions around the plan document. We also have another version of the community engagement game, How to Build a City, that will be online, in person, in Spanish and English as well, that we will start to engage the community around. And that game is designed to share the contents of the document. So it's a different way to reach some of our target audiences, the youth in our community, and as well as our Spanish-speaking population. And then we have 6 months of discussions and conversations with the community, hopefully looking for an adoption by April 2021. And we'll take any further questions you have.
Thank you. I'll just ask the first one on the drive-in. I love that idea. Do you have more information on the drive-in community workshop, or that's to come?
To come, but it's October 31st at the Park Expo. That's next to Bojangles. It's a 6-acre lot that can accommodate 300 cars at a time. There'll be 4 sessions. So it's between 1 p.m. and 10. The theme of the meeting is Driving to Charlotte's Future, and we'll share contents of the plan. Residents will stay in their car, receive a presentation, and use their phones to interact with the presenters at the meeting. And also at the end, at the last session, there will be a movie for families to view, Back to the Future. So that's the setup for the October 31st event, but more information to come for you to share with your constituents.
Thank you. Mr. Driggs?
So, Madam Chair, I just want to say this meeting illustrates the point I made earlier. We have covered a huge amount of material here, and the members of this committee have been told basically to keep quiet because we have no time. We need more time.
I agree.
I look at the last couple of slides, and I have a lot of questions, and I'm an economist, and I'm a businessman, and I believe that I have the right to participate in this. I don't like having this stuff dished up to me like this and being told, shut up, it's time to move on. And that's really my main issue. I don't know, at the end of the day, in the fullness of time, which of these things I might try to kind of help to shape better in order to make them more realizable. I have been a supporter of the CIAP. I have been a supporter of affordable housing. I'm not a naysayer, but we have a responsibility to our constituents to vet this thing. And the way this is being rolled out, we're being given very little time to do so. And particularly from the district I come from, I think there are a lot of issues that my constituents expect me to raise. More than half of the investment is going to go to these areas. We have had a separatist movement in South Charlotte, de-annexation movement. It gained a whole lot of momentum a few years ago. I was the first guy that said it was a stupid idea, but that's what can happen. If you make the people that are actually paying for all this feel left out, then you're going to end up with a taxpayer revolt of some kind. People move out. It's too easy from South Charlotte to move across the county line. So I'm just saying I wish we weren't trying to do this with so little input and so little participation from council. It's actually not been a year and a half time. We've been hearing about the UDO for 3 years, and we have not yet seen what it actually says. And now we're being told the public is going to hear 1 month from now what it says, and we don't know yet. And I just think it's wrong, you know. I mean, it's not a bad plan, but I just think this way of doing it and leaving so little room for us to look at it, to take what we know about our constituents and kind of inform the process that way. I mean, you've gone out and you've talked to thousands of people in the community. Julie got 80,000 votes in the last election. If anybody knows what the community wants, it's us. That's why we're here. And you're talking to other people to find out. And then you're telling us, hurry up today, guys. No time, got to move on. Sorry if you have questions. When are we going to get to ask the questions?
That's fair. I agree with that. And Ty, if you want to address that, because the biggest failure will be if this thing fails. So to Mr. Drake's point, how can we do that better?
So let me go back. I think that if you recall, literally every TAP we've presented this to you. I think the only thing that's different today are those big ideas in those 10 policy frameworks. But even those, I believe the last 2 TAP and the last council meeting, I went through all of those 10, every single one of them. Again, what's different is that the bullet points you see in each one of those plans. The difference, again, between today and the other TAP meetings is that we only spent 15 minutes, 20 minutes walking through plan. But I did not want us to go into those 10 policies today. We could have spent the last 1 hour looking at them without connecting the dot to process where we started and where we're heading. So if you will go through, your archives, you see that we've done that. However, though, one thing that we're planning to do while we're working with the community releasing this is to take the same strategy of meeting with all of you one-on-one and sharing this information with you. There's a lot that went into some of those slides that you've just seen that we don't think you even have 2-3 hours to go through them. But we will spend time with you October, November to kind of walk with you and ask questions and make sure that when we come back again, this isn't the last time. You're going to see this again. We just want to make sure that before we roll something to the community on October 31st, you have a sense of what we're sharing. It's still a draft document. There's nothing finalized here. So you're going to see us back again. You're going to see us at council on October 26th. You're going to see us one-on-one with you, sharing this. But you're also going to see us back here again at TAP before the end of the year, working on this. This plan is far from adoption. It's not, considered for that until March or April. So I get that. I get the frustration. I totally understand it. But if we did not have the other 2 items that were supposed to, at least the referral item that was supposed to go today, we were planning to spend an hour and some minutes with you. But we will still do that. So I don't want you to think that we were trying to stifle your comments. We definitely are mindful of that. As a matter of fact,
my main point is we have been talking about a vision for 3 years at least. And we've been talking in what I consider to be generalities, and we've been saying a lot of things that a bunch of people will buy into. When that draft comes out, that's going to be a huge step. That's when you progress from the generalities down to the nitty-gritty. And so I told you before, I thought we were not 90% done with our mobility plan, we were 60% done. And it really is just a question of how the time is allocated between you and your engagement with the public and then the work that we're able to do in order to feel comfortable that we have a realizable plan that is really fair to our various constituencies. And that is something, the responsibility for which is on us. And I just feel that we have a hard time fulfilling the responsibility. So my only real issue here is this 1 month time frame from this hasty meeting, which, as you said, repeats a lot of stuff we've heard, to the point where the public is looking at a plan when I consider that that plan is not going to be susceptible to really major changes. We're going to be kind of tinkering with it from then on, but the bones of the plan should be in place before it goes out to the public for comment. And so, I mean, if others on council don't agree with me, fine, I'll hold my peace. But I really feel that there's a responsibility we have that's difficult to fulfill in this time frame and under these conditions.
Yeah, I mean, I know that your time is gone, but I would say again that there's nothing we've presented today outside of those specific bullet points which we haven't brought up to council and this committee previously.
That's what I agree with that.
So, and when we started this effort, it was about 18 months ago, not up to 3 years, if I would say that. We're not even 2 years solid into the comprehensive plan process. It started September of 2018.
But Ty, do you remember how the comprehensive plan started? You came here and I was complaining that we were trying to write a UDO and we didn't even know where we were going.
Yes.
That's why the comprehensive plan started. So the UDO had been brought to us for a while before that.
Yes.
And I'm just telling you, as a veteran on this council, I've been hearing this for a long time. I'm still waiting to see it. I want to read it. I want to know what it says.
Yeah, and that's where we're working to. But it was necessary for us to go from a place types, which was what you were all discussing when I first got here. It was necessary for us to tie the place types into a more cohesive, comprehensive, and aspirational document, and then launch into the UDO. So yes, you are right that the UDO started before, but now it's beginning to make sense in terms of the UDO itself, because this plan, this policy framework has to go forward. Because without this, you really can't have a successful UDO. Also remember that initially, our plan was to actually release the draft final plan, the draft document, this month of September. But because of the coronavirus, we pushed it forward by a month.
So when will we see it? When do we see it?
There was this plan that we just shared with you today. The plan before was to release that.
The draft. When do we see the draft?
Oh, you're going to see the draft before the end of October. You're going to see that. You're going to see the
and
draft.
The public will
document.
see it how long after?
And it will be issued to the public, will be released to the public on October 31st.
So again, if I'm alone, I apologize, but it just feels to me like for us to see the draft only a week or two before it is made public, it does not give the kind of weight to council's responsibility for this that it ought to have. That's just my feeling.
If you want to see the draft, prior to that, we can send you some information, but here is always the challenge with a comprehensive plan or any plan process like this. We want it to be as objective and as community informed as possible, rather than staff or city council informed. Because
we are the community, Ty. We're the people that the community elected to do this work. You do not conduct government by plebiscite. There's a reason that we have elected officials. The whole point of having elected officials is that the public chooses the people that it trusts to represent their interests. So you can't kind of minimalize council like that. We are the ones. And we fight to get elected. We are out there in the community all the time, and we will get thrown out if people don't like what happens. So I just think there's a lack of appreciation of what we have to do, what our responsibilities are, when you put it like that. You talk to the community, and then you've got a 1 month window, and then the plan goes out.
So if I came across that way, I apologize. All I'm saying is that at the end of the day, you also want us to bring in front of you what has had a community input in the process before we come back again for you to review and adopt it. I don't think you as a council will want us to come to you and say, hey, here's a document that staff has developed. you're going to ask us and say, does this have a community feedback in the process? So we want to make sure that whatever comes in front of you has had a community engagement. As we feel that we've actually done a lot more than any other area plan or community plan of this type has gone through with regards to engagement. But we also want to make sure that we don't minimize your role in the process. Hence the reason why on a monthly basis we've tried to update you on this. But we will kind of go back and revise how we do this so that you will see what we have before it's shared with the public. And if October 31 doesn't seem like the day that we should release it to the public, we'll come back again and let you know. But I totally understand what you're saying in the process.
It's possible that I'll read it and say, okay, good, let's do it on October 31st. I'm just uncomfortable right now.
Yeah.
Not knowing what it says, agreeing to that timeline.
Okay. Mr. Newton or Mr. Winston, do you all have any comments? And, I just want to say that we've got to do better on putting these agendas together, because this is clearly a topic that is really, I think, some of the most important work we're going to do for this council and on this council for years to come, to Mr. Driggs' point. And we got to leave more time for discussion on these things. So if I don't see any other questions from my online colleagues or Mr. Eggleston, then I think if it's all right, we will not do the Charlotte mobility update since we just got that update to council, but we'll go ahead with the next item, which is the recommendation. And your point is duly noted, and we got to solve for that if people aren't comfortable with it. It is a bit of a chicken and the egg, so having the community input or the council input first, but overall we've got to leave plenty of time for everybody's input or this is going to fail. So with that, we'll go on to the council retreat and then see how much time we have left, because we're already, as it is, running over.
Yes, so thank you very much for allowing us to spend some time on that. I know there's a lot more work to be done. This next item actually is a council referral that came out of the annual strategic meeting that you had in January. And it's really about how do we integrate urban design standards for public safety and security. So Grant Mayachi, who is a division manager for the Urban Design Center, will walk us through a few slides here. And again, think about urban design and public safety, security, and what are those best practices that we can really work with into integrating that into our development process. So, Grant, we've got like a few minutes to do this, so please take it away.
Good afternoon. I'll be really quick here on this. When we talk about safety and security measures in the physical environment, industry standards usually point us to concepts called CPTED, which is crime prevention through environmental design. So I want to talk a little bit about what those concepts are and how they kind of manifest themselves in the places that you see, the places that we create, and our zoning ordinances. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
Yep. So the 5 principles of CPTED, and these are, you'll see words up here that are the principles of CPTED. They aren't necessarily the words that we use when we're actually designing spaces, but I'll explain a little bit about the concept behind this. So natural access control, which is really helping using the design of a space to help guide people in and out and through a space. It talks a lot about the placement of entrances, directional signage, landscaping, and such. Natural surveillance, which is really making sure there are good views into and out of spaces, are really important. So making sure that planting walls and things like that don't create hiding spaces or are too tall or trees that can't hold up high enough. Territorial reinforcement, which is a really odd way of saying you create spaces that have a sense of ownership right? Usually means creating gray active edges with businesses and residents that look out over spaces. So they feel like there's a sense of ownership over that space. Of course, maintenance is really important. Well-maintained spaces look like they're cared for, and that there's a sense of ownership as well. And then you've heard us in the urban design program and placemaking program really talk about the need for really active programming and supporting those beneficial activities in public spaces as well. So you can really boil this down into three different areas. There are kind of physical design elements, there are organizational elements, and kind of technology or electronic elements, like cameras and camera systems. So if we kind of look at how we translate those 5 different principles, we try to design spaces that have really clear border definition and clearly marked transitional zones between public spaces and private spaces. Placing safe activities, unsafe locations brings safe users into the environment and has a potential to reduce crime, and this is within reason, of course. You can certainly designate the use of space by the design using kind of natural barriers and planting areas. We need to always improve the programming of our spaces so they are well utilized and cared for. And we always want to design spaces that are easily seen and easily seen into and out of. So, what that really means, in the public realm is we focus a lot on site and lighting and site lighting, making sure there's good visibility, avoiding creating hiding spaces. We team with our economic development department on safety and security grants and for buildings with their facade grant program, but making sure that those public spaces and private spaces are delineated, that it's easy to find and accentuate the building entrances, that clear glass windows on all elevations, particularly when they face public streets and public spaces, are really necessary to create that kind of natural surveillance. And then using kind of front porches and stoops to create those kind of transitions between the street. If we can translate this even further into, this is mostly the kind of public realm behind the curb. If you think about it in terms of kind of our Vision Zero efforts as well, the idea of creating safe streets for all users really ties in to the same types of principles, great maintenance, good visibility, separation of and delineation of those spaces for different users. So a lot of what we do in terms of the design of the public realm really ties into some of our other goals on safety as well. And, what does that look like? Many times, and you'll see it in the majority of our zoning cases that come up, we're really spending a lot of time and effort on making sure that our building design standards align with not only just good, basic urban design, but a lot of that has the same root in safety and security. So where you think we might be asking for these kind of superfluous design features like canopies and entrance, prominent entrances and clear glass, those really have a different effect whenever you think about it in terms of people's visibility and being able to feel safe on a street or see into a building and out of the building. Certainly lighting and signage are also other important elements as well. In a more residential setting, that transition zone, as I mentioned, between the public and private, so people understand, where they can and can't go. making sure that windows and stoops always face the street, and that there's clear connections of sidewalks between the public sidewalk and an entrance, are all elements that are kind of baked into all our development ordinances and development standards. So these aren't by accident. They aren't always just a truly design measure. They also have, fully intentional safety and security benefits as well. So, what does that look like? We spend a lot of effort in terms of crafting the public realm and making sure that lighting is sufficient both day and night. Making sure that, and this is the picture on the left, is, a corner where we make sure there are ground floor entrances and outdoor space that kind of overlook the public realm too. That's clearly defined. That little porch has its own little railing and things like that. But the fact that that public space overlooks the transit stop allows those neighbors to now be kind of viewing in and out. So if there was something happening at a transit stop, the likelihood of someone being able to look from their home or from their unit out to that area is part of the concept as well. So that was a really, really quick presentation on how we integrate best practices of safety and security into our public spaces and into our zoning ordinance development standards as well. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. I guess and I'm looking at the agenda, it says approval if needed. I guess I don't fully, I understand all of the recommendations and strategies here. I guess I don't fully understand what the action item for council is, or if this is.
I think the committee is supposed to approve the incorporation of these into our overall comprehensive safety plan, right?
Okay, so just.
Committees are all involved in this effort to
Right.
kind of, right.
Yeah, I understand why we're talking about it. I just wanted to make sure I understood what action staff is looking for.
If you choose to take an action on this, then when we review rezoning petitions, the development projects that come to us, then we can also start, when grants group, for example, reviews those will be some of the considerations that are in the process.
So this could be something that as we receive feedback from on 20 different maybe topics within a rezoning about what CDOT's comments are, what CMS's comments are, CMPD, whatever. This could be something that's incorporated in there and used for analysis of the, I guess, benefits or missing elements of a rezoning, that safety elements.
Yes, because we don't have anything right now as part of the planning process that allows us to even do that. And so this is part of your contribution to creating that safe community, great neighborhood within the planning process. So right now you just review development projects based on height, the way they're designed, the integration with the public realm, but then design considerations that also include public safety thought process goes into that evaluation.
So whenever the time comes, Mayor Pro Tem, I'm certainly happy to make the motion that this be something that's incorporated into our comprehensive plan and our analysis of rezonings and land use decisions. I just wanted to make sure I knew where we were trying to get to today.
Mr. Driggs?
I think it would be good if we did recommend this to inform our comprehensive plan. If we start trying to implement these very general statements on individual zonings, people might say, well, where's the ordinance? Where's that written? So we just need to be careful about what we expect to happen in the near future on zoning as a result of this committee's recommendation, because I wouldn't want to sort of spring on people new requirements that they hadn't been told about before. So really, this is probably more a 2040 plan thing.
That's mine as well. Thanks, somebody.
Actually, many of the standards that I've discussed just during this brief presentation are frankly already in our review process because they're good design practice anyway. So, for instance, anytime that we negotiate a townhome rezoning, we really make sure that we work with the petitioner to include design elements like suites, porches, and windows. So you'll see a lot of these things that we do already. So they're not necessarily new in any case. Looking through the lens of only safety might be something that is particularly new, but it won't be common for any of these types of standards to have been discussed and reviewed in zoning cases in our development, our video development with those students as well. So,
Madam Chair, could I make a motion that this committee recommends to full council that these guidelines inform our zoning process and be incorporated into the 2040 plan? Is that a good motion?
Sure. Do we have a second?
Second.
And I just want to make one more comment on that. I agree with that. I think that's really important to have that line item in there on every one of our rezoning cases that we review. But the other piece of this, which isn't so much policy as it is practice, is that it's great to focus on these things, and we should for going forward for new projects. But there's got to also be a simultaneous commitment to improving the existing safety of our built environment. So instead of looking forward always to what we can do with new projects, there's a lot of neighborhoods that aren't going to get a lovely project like this in their neighborhood, and that have sidewalks that are butted right up to the street with trees growing over it, and you've got a 3-foot sidewalk that's just plain dangerous to walk down. And that, there's going to be neighborhoods that will tell you that's their biggest concern right now. So I'll leave it to you guys to figure that part out. But in practice, we've got to have a coordinated effort along with building this out to make sure that our existing neighborhoods, that we, based on what the community tells us, where are the dangerous spots, where do you not feel safe walking on a sidewalk because it's a busy street and the sidewalk doesn't have a setback at all, and what kind of an investment are we going to make in that to be able to start correcting some of that? So including landscaping and lighting that we don't control.
I could amend the motion to say that this committee recommends to full council that these practices inform our community investment zoning decisions and be incorporated into our 2040 plan, so that they're being considered as we make community investment decisions and as we make zoning decisions. Okay. And that they inform those decisions. I don't want to lock us into rigid kind of rules, but I think the idea that these will be considered as we make community investment decisions and as we make zoning decisions, and that they will then get incorporated in the 2040 plan is a good position.
Okay, great.
As a matter of fact, I think the comprehensive plan, one of those policies that you looked at, is the creation of safe and equitable communities, and that fits in right there. So. But I do get what you're saying. It's not just about going forward, but also the investments that we have today, what's driving them. So I agree with the amended motion. I think it.
So not just investments, but operating expense too, of maintaining some of those areas. So you've made an amended motion, and we have a second. Okay, all in favor? Aye. On the committee? Aye.
Roll call.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
Mr. Eggleston?
Yes.
Mr. Driggs, yes. And I agree with that, so that's unanimous. Thank you. And with that, we're going to go ahead, as we mentioned, we're going to postpone the Charlotte Moves update since council just heard that. And I do think that the previous recording is, the previous presentation is recorded, and people can certainly share that and maybe get another update next time on that, on Charlotte Moves and the strategic transportation plan. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
All in favor?
All in favor? Thank you very much, and thanks for the presentations.